So yeah, honesty and self-awareness is something we wanted to talk about with you guys as we were thinking about what are the important elements needed to achieve your vision. In the beginning, we asked you guys all like, what is it you really want? What is your North Star goal? What is the one thing you're striving for? We really felt it was so important to talk about honesty. It's one of High Noon's main five virtues. It just plays such an important role. If you consider yourself like, hey, if I want to get somewhere, I need to first be honest about where I'm at. And any kind of like pretending or any kind of hiding, it doesn't help us, but it's a tendency so many of us have. It's definitely something, a muscle we got to work on, this sense of honesty, and kind of the self-awareness is like the honesty of ourself. So to start things off, I wanted to talk a little bit about this difference between responding versus reacting. And I just want to present the idea of the imagination of, let's say someone presented a scenario to you and they asked you the question, whoa, how would you react in this situation? And then imagine if instead they ask you, how would you respond in this situation? I might be pulling at something here that's not there, but for me, I feel at least there's a difference in how I'd respond to that question. Because like react, it was like, oh, how would I react? It's like, I don't know, it'd be my first instinct. I wouldn't think, it's just how I'd react the moment something happens. If someone asked me like, oh, how would you respond here? I would be like, oh yeah, I think about it. It'd be something that like I had time to think about a little bit and I intended on responding the way I did. You guys probably are already aware there's a difference here, right? Reaction is little to no thinking, no intention. There's many ways we react in our life. Perhaps it's giving an angry response. The other day, actually, my mom texted me and it made me a little bit annoyed what she said in the message. And so I was like already formulating a bunch of responses, like really quick-witted responses. Like, what is that supposed to mean? I decided to take some time. And I realized I'm like, I don't need to respond that way, to react that way. I could respond by asking her, actually, what do you mean by this? Because actually, I'm a little confused what you're trying to tell me right now. I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate. Another one way we kind of react in our life is going to our phone, escaping, scrolling on our phones for long periods of time. Another one is watching porn or masturbating. So another way to think about reacting, right, is coping. We have a lot of things going on in our life. And because we're not aware of what's going on, our tendency is to just react to it. And often, sometimes in reaction, we go to escape and we go to something that we believe would give us some kind of sense of satisfaction, happiness, whatever. So freedom is being able to choose how we respond, right? It's having intention. And I really think this learning to respond is the road to happiness. And this is what self-awareness is all about. So a question I have for you guys is like, where have you learned to respond in your life, in the multitude of areas in your life? And where do you still find yourself reacting, perhaps? And if you don't know how to answer that question, that's pretty normal. I would consider that to be like in this realm of what you don't know, you don't know. Hopefully in this talk, and then something you continue to practice in your life, is expanding the area of what you're aware of. Even if it's being aware of the fact that, hey, I don't really know how to handle this situation well. I know I'm reacting here, but I know I can work on it. I'm going to work on it. So that's what I consider like what I don't know. I don't know how to deal with it. At least I know that it's something that's not working that I need to keep, that I want to address. Just to use this example, if you have this habit of watching porn, you may not even be aware that you're reacting to do that. It just seems to be something that comes up out of the blue, but there's a reason. It's a reaction to something. We want to be able to bring awareness to that. And this awareness starts with honesty. An important point I think about honesty is that we're all honest, but to different levels. I just thought of a brief scenario, right? It's like, I think it's a common thing we might tell someone, like a friend, oh, I procrastinated a bunch before I finally got to work. That's kind of like a societally acceptable statement, right? It's like, oh yeah, me too. I procrastinate all the time. But in this situation, like, are we sharing why? Why did I procrastinate? Do we even ask ourselves that question? Why am I procrastinating? As an example, right? The answer to that question should not be because I'm a failure, because I suck, because I'm weak, which might often be the case. And maybe is the reason why you don't want to ask that question. Because for you, maybe what your conclusion, right, is that, oh, I do this sort of thing, whatever it is, because I'm incapable or I'm less or I'm not worthy. I just want to draw that out. That's just not true. There's more. Another question is like, we don't really often share with people, we're not honest about, is how did this really impact me? Same with ourselves. We're not really honest with ourselves about that. We got to consider, was that really the whole truth when we think about something that happened? Or is there something more? Is there something else that I can learn from this? We need to peel back the layers. We are all like onions, but we don't stink. So this is kind of the main meat of this, talking about these stages of self-awareness. So there's going to be 3. And hopefully in this talk, you'll be able to identify which stage you're in And it's not to judge yourself, but just be able to acknowledge, wow, I'm in this stage in these areas of my life. And then you can have the opportunity to shift, to change. And the way this has been developed, Andrew helped a lot in developing this, is that imagine this is your lower self, or kind of like the self that just like is very impulsive. It's like our desires. That's this kind of like other self. Imagine we're trying to catch up with that other self. And in this scenario, right, it's like we're in this constant state of like someone else is kind of dictating things and we're just following along and just receiving the consequences of the actions that happen. If you resonate with these statements, then perhaps you're in this stage of self-awareness. Your old habits always seem to be a few steps ahead of you. You feel out of control. You can't anticipate what you'll do or how you react. The work feels endless while the results elude you. That's an important point, because I think if any of you had the experience of catching up, maybe you're running with a friend and they're a little bit more fit than you and you try to keep up with them, that's really hard to do. I remember when I was in Uruguay, so I was in Uruguay and they're playing football and they just like wiped the floor with me. It was so hard to like be so behind them, you know? I was constantly feeling like I had to catch up. The state, like we're doing stuff, it feels like we're kind of like fighting, but making any difference on the outcome is kind of like it seems out of our ability. You feel detached from your emotions, suffering the consequences, but not knowing why. I think that's a good way to describe this, right? It's like, my life's not great. I don't really know why. We don't even know we're actually reacting. So stage 2, this is where you can consider it walking next to yourself. So this is where you're starting to begin to recognize patterns, but you still can't always control the outcome. You see it coming a little bit, but you're still not able to do something different to change the outcome. Personally, I remember when I was a lot in like high school, I'd always go to bed with my phone. And the phone for me was like the gateway drug to porn, whether it was going on Facebook first or YouTube videos or Netflix. Eventually I'd get there. It was kind of a game of chance. Some nights, maybe not. Some nights, yes. But even as I began to recognize that, oh, this is the problem, I didn't have like the ability to change my trajectory in the midst of that. So that's kind of where you're at, right? When you're not walking next to yourself, you may feel helpless because you see yourself acting in opposition of what you want. So it's like as you raise your awareness, it's kind of a double-edged sword because you've definitely made progress. At the same time, you can see more clearly perhaps how you're living out of alignment with yourself. And this helplessness honestly can lead to some hopelessness and maybe it'll make you want to give up. You know, we have a lot of people in our programs and stuff who they're doing great progress, they're doing great work, but they don't realize that this is part of it to become more aware of the areas that maybe aren't working and like be close to kind of catching yourself or understanding yourself, but you're not quite there. So it's like in this stage where I'm sure a lot of you guys are in certain areas of your life, this is where we really got to acknowledge our progress, really acknowledge that even just being in this place where we're kind of a little bit more aware of our patterns and kind of the ways that we are reacting, that's really important. So the final stage, getting ahead of yourself. You understand what drives your actions. You can be present to your feelings. You know how to maneuver yourself to a positive outcome. You have a ritual in your life that you follow. Again, you might feel like, oh yeah, I got this down. I have really good self-awareness in a certain area of your life. Maybe this is kind of resonating. Good example of like what this kind of looks like is like, imagining you're like a paramedic. A paramedic comes into like a super chaotic situation, but they're able to be calm and collected and they can assess and act appropriately. They're not coming in and getting swept up and reacting. They bring the awareness and they're just looking, they're observing, they're realizing, okay, what's going on here? Wow, okay, hey, this is a lot, but this seems to be the next step for me, what I need to do. To sum this kind of stage up is that you intentionally make the choices in your life. So a question to consider is, what stage are you in? Especially, let's have you focus on kind of this area of sexual integrity. Do you feel you're in a place where you're still like you're catching up with yourself? It's kind of like no method to the madness, it seems. Are you kind of walking next to yourself? You're on this journey and you're noticing more and more that you react a certain way and it's leading you here, but you haven't quite figured out how to like change the outcome. You haven't quite figured out how to actually not choose porn and masturbation, whatever it is, as a coping mechanism. You're getting ahead of yourself. You can see it coming. You anticipate, hey, you know, when I'm feeling this way, when I'm in these situations, this is often something that I try to turn to. But you know what? I actually know that what I really need in this moment is this. I've kind of set up a clear understanding with myself that, okay, this would be like the junk food and I could eat it, but really I can get the good home cooked meal. I'm going to go do that. So yeah, consider these different areas of your life, right? Sexual integrity is a big one. Health, I think, is another big one. Health, fitness, one to consider. Education, important relationships. Again, this is not a place for judgment. This isn't something to put yourself down, to feel bad about. Like I said in the beginning, this is like such an important stage. It's a big victory. If you can identify where you're at, then you actually have then the ability to move forward. You have the ability to start making decisions that will help you and subject habits that will get you towards your vision, to living that. And that's the whole point, right? That's what we want for you guys. Okay, working on anger and blame. So it's funny. I mean, I knew I was going to give this talk weeks ago. And after the first call, I had an experience. And after the experience happened, I was like, wow, this is a great example of this whole importance of self awareness. So I come from a family where we like to play the blame game a lot. And my wife, she's much better at that, much better. If she's angry, she internalizes a lot more, you know. Also, it's something I actually did, and that's is reasonable. But oftentimes, I didn't realize I had it so much, this like problem. But when I was especially starting to live together with my wife, I realized actually how much like when I get angry, it's like I'm looking to blame something. Something is the problem. It's not me. Something's making me angry, and that's what I'm looking out for. In this situation, it was something small. Like I just came out of the first session together. It was a long day, and I came out of the living room. My wife was sitting there, and she didn't acknowledge me coming out. She was on her computer. I think she like looked up but didn't say anything. And I remember feeling like hurt, like, hey, what the heck? I just came out of like the meeting. Aren't you gonna ask me like how it was? Even say hi. I realized I was starting to get upset. And this is where like I was definitely doing the walking with myself. Then I was thinking about like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna say something and try to like get her sympathy or get her attention. I was like, oh, I'm so tired. And she's like, yeah, I'm really tired too. Just for context, I think some of you guys know this, but my wife is like almost 9 months pregnant. So imagine I'm trying to tell my wife I'm tired. And I knew I was kind of doing it. I was like, what am I doing? Right. But I still was feeling this kind of sense of like, oh, like she's not responding the way that she should to me, you know, in this moment. Like I deserve kind of this appreciation right now because I worked hard. Right. And I remember we sat down and it was just kind of like I was like trying to fight and trying to work through like, how do I respond and how to talk through this? But I had to acknowledge at some point that as long as I'm trying to play this game of anything I'm saying is trying to still get that response from her, then I'm actually just trying to kind of like take from her. I'm really just thinking about myself in this moment. It took a little bit of time. We were talking, but it was pretty like not so much going on. And then when I decided to shift my viewpoint, he's like, you know what? Hey, she said she was tired. And like, look at her. She's really pregnant. It switched my perspective. Like, hey, I'm not going to share to get your attention. I want to share because you're the important person in my life. I want to share. Very slowly, the conversation definitely changed to being more like lighthearted. We started laughing. We could laugh. And I definitely just like felt the change in my feeling and my experience with her. Where it's like, now I could actually feel like I could choose to be a giver in that moment and together kind of initiate some really nice conversation. So that was just a recent example of me where the ability to have some self-awareness in the moment was important. So as kind of a wrap up, I wanted to just talk about these two habits that I really want to recommend. You might already have this habit of reflection, but I really encourage you, if you really want to work on your self-awareness, a daily habit of reflection can get you so far. Just making it a habit to look back on your day and to write down the things that happened, right? Write down the things that happened. And then also like, how did you feel? Well, how did you react to things? Kind of like this question that we did in the group check-in. What were some unpleasant emotions I had today? How did I handle them? And I think what really helps is to kind of write it out as if you're like an observer to your life. You're not the judge. You're not like, oh, that was wrong. That was bad. Because I think that holds us back a lot of the time, unbeknownst to us, that like, I'm ashamed of this, that this happened. I don't want to look at this. So I just want to encourage that. You know, that's a really important thing. Because ultimately, you know, God wants to see us succeed more than us. I think God wants to see us achieve our North Star goal. But, you know, the way God works, which I'm sure you've experienced in your life, he works in subtle ways, right? He presents these opportunities, I think, for us to live up to our North Star goal, to grow essentially, right? To see things potentially in a different light. And so through this kind of ability to reflect and stuff, we can more and more readily be able to receive the lessons that God is trying to show us, to show the little ways that God is guiding us. And in this way, challenges don't need to be things we try to escape, but they actually become opportunities to move forward, including our mistakes and slips. That's really important. Self-awareness will help us to claim the lessons and the victories that we have each day. So yeah, I hope that helped you guys to kind of give you some food for thought and something that perhaps you can start to practice a little bit more in your day-to-day life.